begun in the childlike games of the Bronte sisters and, of course, their brother, contained elements of Gothic horror. For example, Emily's poem, Remembrance, tells of a yearning to join a lover in death, a theme that reappears in her novel, Wuthering Heights. Emily's novel, which is perhaps the most artistically skilled of all the Bronte family writings, is a type of open invitation into the supernatural world, first envisioned in their childhood extravaganzas. The name Wuthering Heights comes from an old Tudor house with thick walls and narrow windows that seems almost alive. This house actually existed deep inside the isolated, bleak Yorkshire moors. This fictional architecture was inherited. This fictional architecture that Emily creates in her novel was inherited by way of Blackwood's magazine and the many haunted house stories and 18th century tales of terror that were found within the pages of the Penny Dreadful magazine. The novel, Wuthering Heights, begins with the arrival of the narrator amid the barbaric desolation of the moors. And because of an unexpected snowstorm, he must sleep in the coffin-like panel bed where Kathy Earnshaw left her diary. What the narrator reads in the diary immediately haunts his dreams. These bad dreams, combined with the banging shutters and the endless cries of Kathy by the rugged master of the house, Heathcliff, all suggest to the reader that Kathy's ghost may have come in the dark and stormy night, come from deep inside the moors to the rattling windows of the house. A sane and faithful housekeeper then tells the narrator the rest of the story, which is told mostly in flashback. So Emily's novel keeps the fictional law of Gothic literature, this law that states that stories of the supernatural should come from a reliable authority or source. The housekeeper is, well, a very sane individual, and she has seen it all. Now, 20 years ago, old Earnshaw brings the ragged Heathcliff back from Liverpool. Now, Heathcliff's origins are unknown. This young boy could be a wharf rat. He could be the offspring of a demon. Or he could be, old Earnshaw's bastard son, illegitimate child. The fact that Heathcliff may be old Earnshaw's bastard son hints at the possible horrors to come, which may include incest. Now, from the very beginning, little Kathy loves little Heathcliff, who is denied all education by Kathy's brother Hindley. Kathy is torn between the coarse orphan and the possibilities of refinement. She's torn between the two and drives poor Heathcliff crazy, alternately encouraging and rejecting him, giving him a massive case of blue balls. Kathy actually exclaims that she is Heathcliff, but she marries the effete Edgar Linton instead. Linton is the scion of a proper family who live in an elegant modern home. So Heathcliff leaves. He splits. He returns several years later to the Yorkshire moors, very, very wealthy. It is not made clear in the novel how Heathcliff got his money. Was it business or theft? We, the reader, just don't know. Heathcliff elopes with Edgar's sister, Isabella, and eventually comes into possession of both the Linton and Earnshaw estates. Heathcliff is present when Kathy gives premature birth to a daughter who is also named Catherine. She dies from complications a few hours later. The second Catherine, when she grows up, marries the sickly son of Heathcliff and Isabella. Now, the novel returns to the present, the point in time where the narrator shows up. This is around 1801 or so. Now, Isabella, Edgar, and young Cathy's husband are all dead. Heathcliff tries to continue his plans for revenge by depriving Hindley's son, Harton, in all the ways that Hindley had deprived him, but soon relents and changes his mind, since Harton's likeness to the Cathy that he loved really startles him. For to Heathcliff, Harton is the ghost of his immortal love come back to life. Heathcliff then makes preparations to mingle with Cathy after his own death. By opening up her grave and loosening the side of her coffin, and bribes the funerary officials to remove the side of her coffin after his own death. The adjacent side of his coffin will be opened up as well, so that, they will mingle together in death. Their bones will rot and commingle in death. Finally, Heathcliff recreates for himself all the conditions, except childbirth, of course, of Cathy's terminal illness and death. Heathcliff dies in a paneled bed and is scandalously buried beside her in the manner that he wished, so that they could mingle together after death. Now, as the novel concludes, the second Catherine and Harton marry, but the local folks always turn back from the moors, for the spirits of Heathcliff and Cathy do not slumber in the quiet earth, and the ghosts are reunited in death. Charlotte's great novel, Jane Eyre, is, part Gothic romance and part realistic first-person account of the spiritual growth of a plain but intelligent orphan girl, growth from childhood to adulthood. When Jane confesses her sexual passion for a man, it was a bit of a problem for the Victorians, and to make matters worse, this sexual passion continues even after Jane finds out that he's already married. That's a big no-no to the Victorians. The novel features startling Gothic events and, unrealistically good and bad characters. The text also contains frequent references in an often mystical tone to fairy tales, magic, and myth, as well as a sense of biblical purpose and heavenly guidance in Jane's life. Now, after the death of Jane's fostering uncle, she feels browbeaten by his widow, and Jane has premonitions of her uncle's spirit rising up from the grave. Now, a streak of light that flashes across the room makes her think for a moment that her premonition is, not just mere superstition, and she screams and screams. And Jane is quickly locked up in her room for doing so. This is, of course, the first of many presentiments, dreams and visions that are all realistically accounted for, but told in such a way that it makes the spine tingle. She uses Gothic in order to get her story across. Now, many tribulations later, Jane becomes the governess of an accomplished child in a mysterious isolated house. This house is known as Thornfield Hall. Many of the house's windows are dark, and most of the rooms are locked. And Jane, paces the eerie halls night after night. Jane hears laughter, maniacal laughter, coming from an attic room. But she accepts, the master of the house's repeated explanations for this laughter. Jane, as she is about to marry the master of the estate, Mr. Rochester, the Byronic father of the talented illegitimate child in her care, before she's about to marry, she learns that his fierce fluctuations of mood, remember, he's a Byronic man, so he's up and down, comes partly from the ugly fact that he is married to the laughing madwoman that is kept locked up in the attic. Jane doesn't know about any of this until, basically the moment of their wedding. Jane departs from Thornfield Hall, but her subsequent life of normality, virtue, and piety is rather boring and lacks the excitement that only the dark and moody Byronic Rochester can provide. Now, in the novel's ending, Jane decides not to marry her upright suitor, who's a parson, the Reverend St. John Rivers, when she hears her name called out suddenly, called out of nowhere, in the darkness. One night she hears her voice in the darkness. She pursues this disembodied voice and then recognizes it as, Rochester, who is, speaking her name in pain and woe. Jane then finds out that he indeed did call out her name many miles away at that exact same moment. A fire has destroyed the house, has destroyed its butler, has destroyed the lunatic wife, who set the fire in, pain and desperation over Rochester's love for the absent governess Jane. So now, the orphan can marry the master, who has been blinded in the attempt to save his mad wife. But in the book's final pages, the Byronic head of the household is beginning to regain his sight. Now, in Charlotte's final novel, Villette, which is published in 1854, the action, which is a systematic series of plots and counterplots, takes place at a rather mysterious and isolated girls' school in Brussels. The heroine, young Lucy Snow, goes to Villette, Brussels, in order to be a teacher at the school. The school is administered by a rather masculine and stern headmistress, Madame Beck, who teases and taunts the young Lucy Snow. Meanwhile, the ghost of a medieval nun, who was buried alive for some transgression against her vows, keeps making appearances. She keeps popping up in the middle of the night. The ghostly nun appears and reappears in the garden of the school, in an alley behind the school that is forbidden to all the pupils. Awakened one night by howling thunder, Lucy goes to the forbidden garden alleyway, and an ivory casket falls at her feet. She opens the casket and finds a note inside stating that the English teacher is a dreadful prying monster. Lucy then falls under the spell of a severe illness and has a visit from her English friends. Reading a letter by candlelight, Lucy again sees the ghostly, apparition of the medieval nun. But this time, she is not alone.